I'm Nick Munn. I am Deputy Director for Copyright at the Intellectual Property Office, and perhaps of most interest to you will be my role in making sure that the UK rolls out orphan work schemes, both our own and the European Directive, and an extended collective licensing scheme. And I'll come on to the significance of those for archives in a minute, if I may, for those of you for whom it's not only obvious, but have a long list of questions, which please do ask later. But before I sort of dig into the substance, I would very much like to say thank you on my own behalf and Robin's and the offices for the invitation to come today. It's been a really fascinating event to be present at. I've certainly learnt some useful things that I've squirreled away, some of which I may repeat now, and a few that may come to surface later. And I'd particularly like to sort of endorse sort of Martin's urging of hearing directly from people with an interest in things and not just from sort of representatives of a particular interest. So I'm particularly grateful to Leslie for what I think has to be the most polite lobbying I have seen in 4.5 years at the Intellectual Property Office, for asking, in a wonderful Scottish accent as well, which I'm very grateful for, can we please change copyright? Well, I mean, the good news, obviously, as Robin has just been telling us, is that we will be changing copyright in some respects, and I'll talk about some of the other copyright changes that we're going to be making. But I thought I'd better start with the elephant in the room, which is the other statement of Leslie's, which Ronan opened with, about copyright making the job of archives impossible. Well, it clearly doesn't make your job impossible, which is good news, because you've managed to do it, and there's a whole bunch of you here today, which is brilliant. But it may not make it any easier, and it may make it a lot harder. I think we are all agreed that that is not a desirable situation, that responsible archivists, acting in the public interest and without harm to other people's interests, are restrained from doing that in undesirable ways, or have to jump through, too many hoops that are too big. So Robin's explained in the context of copyright exceptions about taking some of those activities out of the realm of requiring explicit permission in the interests of making them happen more freely. Now, that's not something we do lightly, because copyright's there for a reason. It's there to protect the interests of the creators of things, and it's not necessarily just there to protect the interests of creators who are deliberately creating something at the time from which they'll derive value. But I have to say that is a lot of the original intention. So we are sort of caught between the need to protect copyright as a thing which protects people who do creative things, of which the ultimate beneficiaries in many cases are archives and their users, but also to make sure that sensible things done by sensible people, and the Codebreakers project and others that we've heard about today are very much in that category, can still happen with the minimum of fuss. I hear very much the sort of statement as well that preservation without access is pointless. It's a start. You can't access it till you've preserved it, but actually the end goal, not only for you as archivists, but also for the government, is that people can access knowledge. And I'm speaking now not just with a copyright hat on, but with a just sort of, this is what the government, and indeed successive governments, have been all about. Stuff that you cannot access, you cannot use productively, whether that's productively in the sense of things that are good for society, good for research, good for the economy, or whatever else. Now, I think Ronan gave us some very interesting questions at the start of this morning, which I think are the right questions. I'm not sure I can necessarily answer them for you, but I'm going to give at least one of them back to you, because the first thing he said was, well, how can we help archivists do their job? And I think that's the right question, and I'm going to try and answer that. I'm working from the slight disadvantage that, whereas Robin, I'm sure, is the person in the room who knows most about what the government is doing on copyright exceptions, I could very well be the person in this room who knows least about archives. So you have me at an advantage, but I'm going to do my best to try and answer this from your point of view, and not just from ours. The other thing I really wanted to highlight from what Ronan said was his appeal for facts about copyright budgets, how often fees get paid and to whom and for what reasons. This is really important information without which we are going to struggle to do the right thing on a number of points. And I particularly want to make that plea in the context of what we're doing in planning on copyright works to do with orphan works. Now, as you'll be aware, there is an Orphan Works Directive that the European Union has approved and is going to have to come into force by the 29th, I think, of October next year. And that will be another copyright exception, which for certain types of works, for cultural uses, which on the whole is what archives are going to be doing, though not exclusively, as we heard from the Churchill collection, is going to allow digitisation on the basis of a diligent search. We had a great discussion of diligent search this morning, and I've taken some very useful points away from that. And in particular, one that struck home with me is the point about the diligent search depending on having knowledge of the subject, of the field, being a person who knows what diligence looks like. And that's actually a really important point that we must make sure we don't lose when we come to talk about it. So I said earlier that the government was somewhat torn in terms of protecting the rights of copyright owners and making sure that sensible things done by archives and other people can happen. You will still, I think, see that reflected in what we are doing and will continue to do on orphan works, where we are trying to balance the wish of some rights holders, particularly photographers, but actually across a range of sectors, to make sure that their work isn't exploited unfairly, against creating a framework to allow archives and others who are responsible and really, frankly, are going to do nobody any harm. And I absolutely accept that's the intention of everyone in this room, to go about that with the minimum of trouble. So I hope soon the government's going to be able to consult on precise rules for how we're going to implement the Orphan Works Directive, how we're going to implement the UK's own Orphan Works scheme, which will allow for some commercial uses and for some other types of work, such as photographs, to be used non-commercially as well. And in the spirit of kind of learning from people, we are going to be looking to develop some guidance around that use of orphan works in the UK, which draws on expertise in different subjects and of different types of work. Not, I think, to come up with a prescriptive set of rules, because one of the things I heard, particularly from Christy this morning, was that this idea of there being no fixed rules. Actually, you couldn't just write a formula that says, this is how you do diligence, this is how you find people. You kind of have to know what you're looking for and then go where the information takes you. And at some point, you're going to have to make a judgment about, you know what, this isn't happening. It's just not reasonable to try and look any further. The ends are all dead ends. And, you know, all of that made perfect sense. So we're looking very much to root what diligent search looks like, not so much in rules, but in the judgment of people who know what they're doing. Having said which, if we just say that, there is a real risk that will not provide anyone with the certainty they're looking for. So again, there's a trade-off between providing people with certainty, definiteness, and frankly, for people who are a little less expert than you in this room, actually some help on knowing where to start, without just prescribing something which in some cases will require you to do a bunch of things that will never turn up an author, and in other cases will be the wrong things to do, but you'd find them easily in another way. So giving wrong permissions in either case. So to respond again to Leslie's call, can we please change copyright? Well, yes, we are changing copyright. Now, what we've heard from a variety of people is, yes, but A, you haven't done it yet, and B, you're not changing it enough or in the right ways. Okay, well, because we haven't done it yet, it's very hard to tell how far what we are doing will go. I have a feeling that we will probably not get to the future of not having to worry too much about copyright for archives in one go. What I am hoping, though, is that between the copyright exceptions changes and the orphan works scheme and the possibility, although I think it's not an immediate possibility, of some form of collective licensing around archive uses, which would require a lot of negotiation, but actually is starting to be put on the table by what the government is doing and providing for. I'm hoping that's going to start to move the balance towards archives being able to do more easily for more things what is in their mission to do without moving too many owners of copyright into the position of being in any way deprived or too upset or too harmed in their reputations. We heard about reputation earlier. In what happens. So I'd like to conclude just by saying we had a provocation from Martin about the current state of the law and whether, and the fact that, frankly, the financial sanctions, in his view, on infringing copyright for an archive project were just not that big. Now, it's funny how I think Martin thinks he's telling me, you know what, so you shouldn't bother with all this. There is part of me, however, that's writing down, should we make a criminal offence? Actually, I've had to have this conversation with the team who are working on Orphan Works, and I have to say the conversation I had with them was, I really do not want there to be a new criminal offence for, so many reasons, which starts to criminalise the activity of art. That's not the way in which this is meant to be going, folks. Not because we are, in any sense, wanting to condone criminal behaviour. And in fact, a lot of what we are doing is because the government, for reasons I think you will probably understand, just can't put itself in the place where it is going to wink at or condone breaking the law, even if it's not breaking the criminal law. And if you think about that for a second, you will realise that however inconvenient and annoying and difficult that is for archives, you do not want, as a general principle, to have a government that's got a bit of a kind of, attitude to the law. You do not want to have that. And if you've ever visited a country where that is the attitude of government, you will know about it, and you may indeed have stories to tell about it. So we're in the position of trying to provide legal answers. We are not able and not necessarily rushing, however, to close down the risk-managed approach. We know why you take it. We know that you're interested in doing that for your own laudable objectives, and that will continue to be an option as far as I can see into the future. Certainly it's not one that we are looking to close down. I would say that by creating legal alternatives, you may find that the courts are a little bit less sympathetic about not using them where they are appropriate, but equally those options will remain open to you. And while you will understand that I cannot in any way urge you or even recommend you to use them, nor can I tell you that they're going to vanish like fairy gold. So your position, I hope, as a result of what the government is doing, is better. You have more options. You have more options to do things legally. You have no fewer options to do things unlawfully if you feel you must. And on that note, let me just return to the conditions of the legal scheme. And people have been very keen to make sure that what the government does is as simple and easy to use as possible, so they can stay within the law and stay within what the government does, as opposed to breaking the law. What I'd like to say is that the evidence that's being collected, for instance around the Codebreakers project, is the kind of thing that will really help set appropriate conditions for licensing of orphan works through the UK scheme. So actually keep collecting that, keep giving us information from your own experience as archivists, and particularly from these projects where you've got some systematic data, that will help us kind of condition what we are doing and get the answers, if not perhaps completely right from your point of view, at least a lot closer to right than we would have done otherwise. So today's been wonderful for that. I'd like to thank Create and Welcome in particular for letting us be here. I'm going to hand over to Tim Padfield for some thoughts on my thoughts and indeed things said so far, and then Martin will attempt to give us a severe grilling and probably let you get a few questions in as well. Thanks very much.